The pace is unrealistic. I think he's prepared to accept bloodshed and human misery. Everyone can see the tragedy looming. Strangely enough, Mountbatten does not see it. Maybe he could not care less. One has a feeling that he wants to please his bosses in the United Kingdom and get out before a greater mess is created. Then he can blame all the politicians for the disaster. Mountbatten is impetuous and a hustler, and gives decisions on the spot. He possesses incurable optimism and is oversensitive to criticism, which hurts his vanity. This is his weakest point. He's not prepared to listen. Jenkins, the governor of Punjab, has sent hair-raising reports of the disorders which may follow. Mountbatten is paying no attention to them. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Denise. Today we're going to be doing a chapter from the Mountbattens called A Tryst with Destiny. Yes, it's Sunday. It's time for our Sunday treat. And we all love the Mountbattens. This chapter is quite dense in the sense that we're talking about Dickie and the political situation that he's facing and Partition and how everything is going to hell in a handbasket. And the fact that Dickie's weary. He's tired of this. His marriage is a mess. Edwina's going through menopause, which apparently is making her super difficult. She's having complications from her partial hysterectomy, which is making her hard to get along with. But the chapter is really not about Dickie and Edwina. That's just sort of a minor footnote on this chapter. Sort of an explanation for why Dickie is settling for some of these really pathetic plans on what to do with the political situation. And I say pathetic, but I don't know that any of us would have known what to do in that situation. Everyone around him feels like he is agreeing on a plan that is just fundamentally flawed at every level, but he's just pushing forward. And some people thought that perhaps because his relationship with his wife was so difficult that he was just worn down and weary and just wanted to get the ball rolling, whatever. However, whatever, you Indians need to figure this out. Just here's some kind of a plan. You guys sort it out. So most of today's episode is going to be me reading from the book. I have a very limited knowledge about Indian history, and nothing that I say would add to your historical understanding. It would just be comments from the peanut gallery if I jumped in. So today's episode, unlike most episodes, is mostly going to just be the chapter. There will be a time or two, I'm sure I'll jump in and have something to say, but I really don't want to detract from the weight and worth of this chapter by me talking about something I truly don't know anything about. So I'm going to be learning right along with you in today's chapter. It begins this way. Even before Mountbatten had arrived, Indian politicians had accepted that partition was inevitable, not least because of Jinnah's insistence on a separate Muslim state and the paralysis in the Executive Council. Mountbatten's challenge was to find a plan that all would accept. On April 11th, Ismay sent VP Menon the, quote, bare bones of a possible plan for the transfer of power, asking him to make comments, to, quote, put some flesh upon it and work out a rough timetable. Plan Balkan argued for the partition of Punjab, Bengal, and Assam, a separate plebiscite in the northwest frontier province, with the provinces working out their own constitutions and with a central government dealing with defense, foreign affairs, and communications. Mountbatten argued that it had to be the Indians themselves who would take the final decision on their future. A few days later, the provincial governors met to discuss the plan. They agreed the transfer of power must be quick to avoid the country disintegrating and accepted, with regret, there was no alternative to partition. Sir Olaf Carow, governor of the northwest frontier, and Sir Evan Jenkins, governor of the Punjab, warned Mountbatten that once partition was announced, it would be followed by an immediate blow-up. There was therefore a military problem of considerable magnitude. Against these threats, British administration was breaking down. Sir John Colvin, governor of Bombay, said he had only 22 ICS officers to manage a province of about 30 million people, and estimated there were 12 private armies operating, which numbered more than 400,000, from the 7,000 in Abdul Ghaffar Khan's Red Shirts to the 100,000 in the Hindu Mahasabha, the nationalist movement that proclaimed India should be for Hindus. The northwest frontier presented a particular problem as 90% of its population were Muslim, but it had elected a Congress government in 1945. Both factions therefore laid claim to it. At the end of April, Mountbatten decided he should visit it, one of only 2 provincial visits that he would make during his viceroyalty. The evening before, Government House had been invaded, and a shot fired through a window. Carow requested that he should make an appearance to try to defuse the situation. Edwina insisted on accompanying him. From a railway embankment, hand in hand and silhouetted against the sky, the couple looked down on 70,000 people, any of whom, they were aware, could have been killed with a bomb or bullet. By chance, they were dressed simply in bush shirts, the green matching the Pakistani national color. I neither spoke nor waved to them, but simply stood there, Mountbatten later reported. There was a moment's silence and then cries of, "Mountbatten Zindabad! Long live Mountbatten!" The shouting was too great for a speech, so for nearly an hour the Mountbattens simply stood waving to the crowd. The situation had been diffused, but for how long? While Dickie and Pamela returned to Delhi, Edwina stayed in for 4 days, traveling 1,500 miles by air, jeep, and on foot, to see for herself the extent of the damage from the disturbances. In one town, Kahuta, a Muslim horde had overwhelmed the town, raping the women before killing them and burning the town down. For Dickie, it was confirmation that independence needed to come quickly. For Edwina, an indication of the challenges that might soon be faced in terms of humanitarian aid. She was immediately galvanized into action, writing to officials recommending various practical measures, including setting up health clinics and refugee camps. She had found a role for herself again, no longer simply as an appendage to her husband. Dickie had no illusions about the problems that lay ahead, not least a great deal of trouble on the frontier. Continued, "The more I look at the problems of India, the more I realize that all this partition business is sheer madness and is going to reduce the economic efficiency of the whole country immeasurably. No one would ever induce me to agree to it, were it not for this fantastic communal madness that has seized everybody and leaves no other course open." At the beginning of May, Ismay therefore presented a new plan to London. It allowed for each of the 11 provinces to decide their own future. Bengal and the Punjab to choose being split between India and Pakistan, to join one country entirely or go it alone. Within a week, it had been approved by the cabinet. The aim was to release the text 24 hours before Indian leaders next met, on May 17th, thereby reducing the amount of time they would suggest amendments. On May 6th, Dickie, Edwina, Pamela, and Peter Murphy left to spend a few days relaxing in Simla. Edwina had suffered from bad neuralgia on the northwest frontier, and Dickie was recovering from a bad go of, quote, Delhi belly. 3 days later, they were joined at the Viceregal Weekend House, another 1,000 feet higher, near the village of Mushabra, by Nehru, who entertained them by standing on his head and showing them how to walk backwards uphill. Encouraged by the relaxed atmosphere and keen to have Nehru's views on the plan, Dickie gave Nehru his proposed plan to read as he was going to bed. His response was immediate and negative, arguing that the plan would balkanize India, creating a series of independent states at loggerheads with each other. Mountbatten thought Nehru had accepted the plan. Nehru claimed he'd never properly been shown it. "It's clear the whole of this sorry postponement has been due to over-trustfulness and impatience," wrote John Christie in his diary on May 14th. It had been a humiliation. Mountbatten had told the cabinet the plan was acceptable to the Indian leaders, but at least he had averted a greater embarrassment. Soon Dickie, who could well have been finished, was congratulating himself that he had followed his hunch. VP Menon now came up with a solution, one which saved face for both countries and Britain. Power would be handed over to 2 central governments, each with dominion status and a governor-general, and each with its own constituent assembly. If both countries were members of the Commonwealth, then some form of unity would be preserved. It would make independence smoother and encourage British civil servants and soldiers to stay on. It would also reassure the princes and bring them to the negotiating table. According to Auchinleck's secretary, there was also a strategic element for the chiefs of staff. In case of war with Russia, they could have strategic bases and other facilities in the northwest of the subcontinent. Besides, it will allow them the use of the Muslims' manpower and the goodwill and support of the other Muslim states. It will also ensure the independence and integrity of Afghanistan. At the same time, it will have a stabilizing effect on India and keep her on the right path. The plan, now labeled Plan Partition, ticked all the boxes, providing for an earlier transfer of power, retaining the essential unity of India, and give Jinnah his desired Pakistan. Edwina was not part of the discussions, but her persuasive powers were deployed by Dickie to bring round Nehru, who saw membership of the Commonwealth as at odds with his view that India should be a sovereign republic. "We've made real friends with him, and whatever else happens, I feel this friendship is sincere and will last," wrote Dickie about the 4 days Nehru had spent with them. Edwina had saved her husband's career again. Mountbatten won approval of the new plan and left to sell it to a bemused cabinet. So much for his claimed plenipotentiary powers, who felt that they had only recently agreed another plan. While Dickie saw various ministers, especially Churchill, who as opposition leader was crucial to support the new legislation through Parliament, Edwina caught up with Malcolm Sargent and spent a few days at Nada's villa in the south of France. Malcolm Sargent's her little boyfriend, the conductor, if you'll recall. The plan now cleared by the cabinet, the Mountbattens returned to sell it to the Indians. At 10 o'clock a.m. on June 2nd, a few days after returning to Delhi, Mountbatten called the Indian leaders together and gave out copies of the immediate transfer of power, asking for their reactions by midnight. With minor quibbles, Congress, their dream of united India in tatters, agreed, but Jinnah, who had achieved his separate, if moth-eaten Pakistan, was reiterating his demands: a Pakistan with Punjab and Bengal undivided, and an 800-mile corridor linking East and West Pakistan. He said he needed a week to secure the support of the Council of an All-India Muslim League. It looked like the plan would be defeated yet again, as Congress had only accepted on the basis that the Muslim League would simultaneously agree. Mountbatten then asked if Jinnah, who appeared prepared to lose his dream of Pakistan, would allow the viceroy to say he had his support. The Muslim League leader nodded imperceptibly. On June 4th, Dickey announced his plan at a news conference for 300 journalists. Speaking without notes for 45 minutes, Mountbatten outlined the plan and answered questions. The message was clear. Indians had wanted independence and partition. They must make it work for themselves. Asked when independence might come, he paused for a moment, and then almost casually, this detail was not included in the summary sent to London, said August 15th. It left 72 days to take the required bill through Parliament and divide a continent. Francis Ingalls, an Indian Army officer, was at dinner with the Mountbattens when partition was brought up. He wrote, "It all seems so sudden," someone remarked. There was a silence. Everyone was waiting for the Viceroy's reaction. Lord Mountbatten smoothly agreed that it was perhaps rather sudden, but went on to say that in his experience that was the best way to get things done. "You give your staff a plan," he said, "and ask how long they need to put the plan into operation. Let us say they estimate 4 weeks, and then you tell them do it in 2. Everyone is shocked into action, and you surprise your enemy." Whereupon Ingalls' voice was heard to say, "And who is your enemy, sir?" Now, the Indian Independence Bill created 2 separate cabinets and administration for 2 countries. All the government posts, including the police, army, judiciary, postal system, and civil service, would have to be split between the 2 countries and their assets divided. But for Pakistan, it was the greater challenge, as everything had to be created from scratch. There was almost 1 million people working on Indian railways, with about 150,000 who wanted to transfer between the countries. There was no way this could be done in the time available. Apart from dividing human resources, there was all the equipment that had to be split, down to who received the last trombone in the Lahore police band. The cash balances and public debt had to be apportioned, with the relative contributions and responsibilities between the 2 countries much disputed. Banking had always been the preserve of non-Muslims, principally because the lending of money for profit is forbidden under Islamic law. It was agreed the Reserve Bank of India would handle Pakistan's financial affairs until October 1948, and the existing Indian currency would remain in use in both countries until March 1948, but by December 1947 the system had broken down as a result of a series of disputes. The Andaman Islands and the Bay of Bengal were used as a penal colony. Congress felt that they belonged to India. The Muslim League wanted them as a refueling point between East and West Pakistan. Congress felt that they belonged to India. The Muslim League wanted them as a refueling point between East and West Pakistan, whilst British service chiefs argued for them remaining a Commonwealth naval base. And what would happen to the assets overseas, such as India House and the treasures of the India Office? Shahid Hamid, like many, could see the problems of this speeded-up transfer. He wrote, "The pace is unrealistic. I think he's prepared to accept bloodshed and human misery. Everyone can see the tragedy looming. Strangely enough, Mountbatten does not see it. Maybe he could not care less. One has a feeling that he wants to please his bosses in the United Kingdom and get out before a greater mess is created. Then he can blame all the politicians for the disaster. Mountbatten is impetuous and a hustler, and gives decisions on the spot. He possesses incurable optimism and is oversensitive to criticism, which hurts his vanity. This is his weakest point. He's not prepared to listen. Jenkins, the governor of Punjab, has sent hair-raising reports of the disorders which may follow. Mountbatten is paying no attention to them." Amongst those also telling him that the transfer could not be achieved at that time were Nehru, Congress politicians, and Mountbatten's own staff, such as Eric Melville, Pug Ismay, and Claude Auchinleck. The viceroy ignored them. Could there have been a more personal reason for his rush? Marital relationships with Edwina by June were even more strained than ever. She was anxious to leave India and ever more critical of her husband. Perhaps, if he could carry out the transfer of power swiftly and efficiently enough, Alex von Tüzelmann has suggested, he might still save his marriage. One of the biggest headaches was splitting the Indian army. Clearly, each country had to have its own army. But to divide it in such a short time would be almost impossible. The commander-in-chief, Claude Auchinleck, thought that it would take 3 years, and it did mean that, should there be communal violence, there was no independent body to maintain law and order. Ismay was concerned that these, quote, magnificent units were to be mutilated and argued, why not divide the army on numerical lines in the first instance, India getting 2/3 and Pakistan 1/3? Later on, when things were more settled, it might be found more expedient to transfer the Hindu element to the Pakistan army to India and vice versa. Jinnah was adamant. He said he would refuse to take over power on August 15th unless he had an army of appropriate strength and predominantly Muslim composition under his control. Jinnah's always a bit of a stick in the works, isn't he? The Joint Defense Committee to monitor the division of the armed forces was therefore set up on June 30th under Sir Chindula Trivedi, a former secretary of the War Department and a Hindu, but also a close friend of Liaquat Ali Khan of the Muslim League, so it had Muslim support. The decision was made to split along religious lines, but that ignored personal wishes. There were, for example, many non-Muslims who considered provinces allocated to Pakistan to be home. Many could not decide or succumbed under communal pressure. And then there was the question of British troops, many of whom could not wait to be demobbed. My own view is that we should withdraw them immediately, the transfer of power, wrote Mountbatten in June to Archie Nye. There's no reason to anticipate a movement specifically directed against the British after the transfer of power, and a handful of British troops would be no special security against sporadic disturbance in difficult parts of the country due perhaps to a general weakening of the administration. Edwina's role was to ensure that all the medical and social welfare organizations were prepared once the British had left. Throughout June and July, she brought various groups together, ensuring that faculties were ready, finances sorted, and priorities identified. There was an appeal for nurses and midwives and a campaign to recruit over 14,000 health visitors to deal with tuberculosis. A major achievement was ensuring, through an appeal to Nehru, that the Nursing Council Bill, which regulated nursing care and gave nurses an honors degree from the College of Nursing, and had been stuck on the legislation since 1943, was passed. On July 18th, Dickie and Edwina celebrated their silver wedding anniversary, where they were presented with an inscribed silver salver by their staff. 95 people came to dinner, including Nehru, Jinnah, the cabinet, and various princes, and there was Indian music and dances. The pressure of the heavy workload and Edwina's menopause, however, meant the marriage remained strained. Edwina's menopause is like the little demon that continues to pop up throughout this latest part of the book. It's always Edwina's menopause. It kind of makes me scared to go through menopause. It seems to wreak such havoc. Anyway, another concern for Mountbatten was the future of the 565 princely states. They covered some 2/5 of the subcontinent, made up a quarter of the population, and were the direct responsibility of the British Crown rather than the government in Delhi. The citizens were not British subjects like other Indians, but, quote, British protected persons. In return for acknowledging British paramountcy through individual treaties, their defense, foreign policy, and communications were the responsibility of the British. Within their own borders, the princes wielded absolute power over the lives of their subjects, making and enforcing their own civil and criminal laws, directing their own administration, levying their own taxes and customs, frequently minting their own currency, and issuing their own stamps. But they varied enormously in wealth and size and importance. Many had preferred to spend their riches on women, horses, cars, and gambling, rather than their states, with the result that many princely states remained like medieval kingdoms, while others, like Mysore, were progressive and efficient. The Cabinet Mission Plan, arguing that British obligations lapsed at independence, had simply left them to strike their own arrangements with any successor governments or governments. Now, with an independence date set, some of the states declared that they would opt for individual independence, which would destroy the administrative infrastructure. On July 25th, the Chamber of Princes assembled in Delhi, some 25 rulers and 74 representatives of the lesser states. Dickie, resplendent in full uniform with all his decorations and a meeting capped at 2 hours, worked all his charms to bring them on board. When one representative claimed not to have received instructions on what to do, Mountbatten theatrically picked up a glass paperweight, looked into it, and after dramatic silence, announced that the Maharaja had asked him to sign the instrument of accession. 3 days later, Mountbatten gave a party for the princes. Those who had not signed an instrument of accession were very publicly taken aside for a, quote, friendly chat with the viceroy. Though the option of becoming independent was offered, the princes were encouraged through a mixture of charm, bribes of ambassadorships, and threats, for the sake of an integrated India and Pakistan, to join either India or Pakistan, whilst the continent remained under British rule. An extra sweetener was that the two countries would be part of the Commonwealth, that the princes would retain their privileges, properties, and privy purses, and that the new central governments would only control the functions previously exercised by the British: defense, external relations, and communications. The princes had little choice, knowing that the new countries would otherwise simply seize their assets. Privately, Mountbatten, though he was happy to take advantage of their hospitality, thought the princes were anachronisms, referring to them as a bunch of nitwits. He knew that the guarantees of local self-government and privileges offered by India and Pakistan would not be honored for long, as they were not. But his job was to deliver a, quote, full basket of apples to the two new countries before independence, and that is largely what he did. It left a residual bitterness with many. The Maharawal of Dungapur told his political agent, Charles Chinot Trench, that, quote, by making them sign the instrument of accession, the viceroy perpetrated the rape of the states. Had the princes been left alone, Congress could never have got them to sign away their powers and heritage within a fortnight. No, never. Being a member of the royal family, many princes took Mountbatten as a friend. Nothing could be further from the truth. The princes expected justice and fair play, not lies and half-truths to beguile them into a snare. Two states, however, presented particular problems. The largest, Hyderabad, it was the size of France and had a population of 16 million, was predominantly Hindu and entirely surrounded by India, but ruled by a Muslim heavily influenced by a fanatical movement. In Kashmir, almost completely bordered by Pakistan, a Hindu dynasty ruled a mainly Muslim state. A further complication was that Nehru's family came from Kashmir and he had a strong emotional attachment to the state. Dickey flew to have talks with the Maharaja Hari Singh, who found any number of displacement activities, from all-day fishing trips where Mountbatten shocked staff by sunbathing in the nude, to bear hunts and visits to exhibitions of carpet-making and papier-mâché work, to avoid addressing the problems. In neither state had a decision been made when independence came, but Mountbatten's achievement was to have corralled all the others into making a choice by August 15th. Dickey had expected to be Governor-General of both dominions after independence, to ensure a smooth transition and impartiality in overseeing the division of assets. But he had not counted on Jinnah's unpredictability, nor his distrust of the viceroy. He thought him flash and second-rate. Rather than take the perceived more powerful position of Prime Minister at the beginning of July, Jinnah insisted on becoming Governor-General himself. It placed Mountbatten in a difficult position and further increased suspicion of him taking sides. He unsuccessfully lobbied Jinnah through the leading Muslim prince and dithered on whether he should then solely accept the Indian role. It had been a betrayal, a challenge to his authority and his reputation, and for several days Mountbatten threatened to resign. Ismay and Campbell Johnson were sent to canvass opinion in London. Only personal messages from the King, Attlee, and Churchill persuaded Mountbatten to stay. But, quote, from this stage on, the Pakistan writer and politician Muhammad Ali remembered, there was a noticeable change in Mountbatten's attitude toward the problems of partition and toward Pakistan. Mountbatten had barely tolerated Jinnah in the past, and now there was active hostility. Mountbatten wrote to his eldest daughter despondently, I've made a mess of things through overconfidence and overtiredness. I'm just whacked and worn out, and would really like to go. I'm so depressed, darling, because until this stupid mishandling of the Jinnah situation, I'd done so well. It has certainly taken me down many pegs. On July 9th, Edwina noted in her diary, overwhelming opinion, however, that we should stay. Also to take on chairmanship of Joint Defense Council. Decided, therefore, no alternative. Many misgivings. Morally, logically, as well as personally, feel it's wrong, but that D has been faced with such a position that he cannot refuse. On July 8th, the barrister Cyril Radcliffe arranged to act as chairman of a boundary commission to define the 3,800 miles of borders of Punjab and Bengal. Mountbatten had known Radcliffe during the war when, as Director General of the Minister of Information, he had been responsible for running government censorship and propaganda. A stocky, fastidious man, known at Haileybury as Squit Radcliffe, he had taken a first at Oxford and was a Fellow of All Souls. The fact that he had never been to India was regarded as a strength rather than a weakness. Radcliffe had been given an impossible task, given his lack of knowledge, the limited time scale, and the scant resources at his disposal. He was working with a census that was 6 years out of date, and the fact that his Hindu and Muslim colleagues on the commission divided on sectarian lines, requiring him to make decisions alone. Amongst the factors, he had to take into account were river courses and irrigation systems, balancing assets between the two countries, ethnic population divisions, natural boundaries, the integrity of forest, and communication networks, all in just over a month. What sort of hell has this man found himself? Can you even imagine? I am stressed out for him. When Radcliffe recommended The disruption to Punjab's intricate canal system could be minimized by India and Pakistan jointly operating the headworks, Jinnah replied that, quote, he would rather have Pakistan deserts than fertile fields watered by the courtesy of the Hindus, while Nehru curtly informed Radcliffe that what India did with India's rivers was India's affair. It was an indication of what was to come. On August 9th, recall, August 15th is the deadline for all this to be done, Radcliffe was ready to announce his deliberations. This presented Mountbatten with a dilemma. Knowing that the boundary decisions would be unpopular in some quarters, did he make them public immediately and overshadow the independent celebrations, or did he kick the ball down the road, so it became the problem of the newly independent countries rather than the British? It is said that he is terrified to announce it before the independent celebrations, as disturbances may ensue on a large scale, which would be his responsibility and that of His Majesty's government to handle and control, Hamid wrote in his diary on August 9th. This he is not prepared to face. Sir George Abel argued for immediate release so troops could be moved to the affected areas. But Mountbatten ignored his advice, possibly wanting to savor the day without recriminations, and chose to wait until independence to announce the arbitration. It was a decision that was to have disastrous consequences. The pressures of impending independence were beginning to take their toll on the Mountbatten marriage. The last 2 days have been pretty good hell, Ismay wrote to his wife at the beginning of August. Both Dickie and Edwina are dead tired, nervy as they can be, and right across each other. So that in addition to my other troubles, I've been doing peacemaker and general sedative. It's very wearying for them, and for me. In the past, the two had been able to manage separate lives. Now they lived and worked together. Naturally competitive, Edwina was jealous of her husband's new priorities, suffering from the heat and felt unsettled. These domestic tensions only added to the pressures Mountbatten faced. On August 13th, the couple flew to Karachi for the Pakistan independence celebrations. All did not go well. At dinner, Jinnah and Mountbatten argued over Mountbatten's decision not to arrest the Sikh leader Tara Singh. The viceroy felt that it would only further inflame the situation, and in any case, it was difficult to access the holy courtyards where he hid. And the delay in announcing the boundaries, which Jinnah argued, only increased the possibility of violence. Jinnah made a short speech. Mountbatten, according to Hamid, who was present, indulged in a long oration which was not in keeping with such an occasion, and then discussed why he had brought forward the transfer of power. He drew a childish smile by saying that the best way to teach a youngster to cycle was to take him on top of a hill, put him on the seat, and push him down the hill. By the time he arrived on the flat ground below, he would have learnt to cycle. Thereupon somebody whispered that there was also the danger that he might break his neck. A plot had been uncovered to throw a bomb into Jinnah's car during the 3-mile state procession the next day, so Mountbatten had volunteered to ride with him. Sitting side by side in an open Rolls-Royce, Jinnah and Mountbatten braced themselves for the attack. As the procession ended without incident, Jinnah allowed himself to place his hand on Mountbatten's knee and congratulate him on bringing the viceroy home safely. Back in Delhi, the Mountbattens dined alone, and then spent their final hours in the office watching Bob Hope in My Favorite Brunette. One of the viceroy's final acts was to make the wife of the Nawab of Palmyra Highness, which the Colonial Office had refused, in spite of her popularity because she was Australian. Just before midnight, Nehru addressed the Constituent Assembly. Long years ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or fully, but very substantially. At the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. As midnight struck on August 15th, Nehru, with Rajendra Prasad, President of the Constituent Assembly, arrived at Viceroy's house to formally invite Mountbatten to be India's first Governor-General and give him an envelope with the names of ministers to be sworn in later that morning. When opened, it was empty. Such had been the excitement, they had forgotten to put anything inside. At 8:30 the next morning, the Mountbattens, Edwina in a long gold lame dress with a wreath of gold leaves on her head, entered the Durbar Hall for their second swearing-in 5 months. Dickie became the first constitutional head of the new India. That afternoon, they were taken by carriage to a children's fete and to watch the new Indian flag being unfurled. 30,000 people had been expected. 250,000 had come. Escorted by the mounted bodyguard, the Mountbattens were stuck 25 yards from the flagstaff, with the crowds trying to climb into the carriage. Mountbatten reported, quote, "We ended with 4 Indian ladies with their children, the Polish wife of a British officer, and an Indian pressman who crawled up behind. The planned parade and speeches had to be abandoned. All they could do was give orders to hoist the flag and fire a salute. A state banquet for 100, speeches at 9:15 p.m. in the state drawing rooms. The Mountbattens received almost 3,000 guests, each of whom were presented to the new Governor-General and his wife. Outside, the Mogul garden sparkled with colored lights. For Mountbatten, it had been, quote, the most remarkable and inspiring day of my life. Congratulations arrived from around the world, including a telegram from Atlee. It said, my warmest thanks to you on this day, which sees successful achievement of a task of an unexampled difficulty. The continual skill displayed in meeting every difficulty has been amazing. Your short tenure of viceroyalty has been one of the most memorable in a long list. In this message of thanks, I included Weena, Ismay, and other helpers. Mountbatten was raised in rank, taking the title of Earl Mountbatten of Burma. The Mountbattens had done it together, a fact Dickie acknowledged, writing to the, quote, person who helped me most. Thank you, my pet, with all my heart. Radcliffe, Jenkins, and other officials had already left, not wishing to be part of the celebrations. That's the end of that chapter. It was certainly, I think, a denser chapter than some that we read before, but thank you so much for listening to that one. I think it is really important to see what he did experience during that time as Viceroy, but also how he chose to handle it. Certainly there was mixed emotions and feelings about him, but then at the same time, I don't know that anyone could have done much more with the scenario that they had. I certainly don't envy the position that he had. It was difficult. It was unprecedented. There's no guidance. There was no way to lean on how to do this or how to do it right. And then, of course, you compile the fact that he's having a terrible situation with his wife. They can't get along. They've never had to be with each other for this long. They've made their marriage work because they've avoided each other and now they can't. The whole thing was riff from the start with trouble. But anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. If you are enjoying the new book that we're reading, The Housekeeper's Diary, oh my goodness, we have another episode coming out tomorrow. I find that book to be so fascinating. It's probably the most fascinating book I've read so far because it has so many little details that nobody else will mention. But this is the other thing. This book has none of this. Well, sources close say it's been rumored that some people suspect that. None of this. She names names of who said what. I mean, she's not like she's not hiding anybody in this story. She's talking about, her own son who worked as valet and who was later a butler, I believe. I mean, he's over there being quoted right, left, and center. All of these different people, she's like naming by name who they are and what they said to her. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how rude these people are behind the scenes. Like, Diana was mean. And I mean, just kind of like slovenly when we talk about Sarah next episode, like, I thought like shaving in the bed and eating chocolate and crackers in the bed and then like basically like sort of like sleeping in all the crumbs was gross. Sarah's got some of her own ways that are like, y'all, come on. Like, this is not the right way to behave. It's kind of slovenly. So, and just all these like little interesting details about like, what they liked to do, what they didn't like to do, like some of their habits, some of their rituals. It's like, wow, what a unique group of people this is. So I'm just finding it extremely interesting. So if you like that kind of stuff, if you like the little details that you've never heard before, this is your book. I can't put it down. I'm so drawn into what she has to say, but also because she's so fair. And I think that's the other thing that makes me like her so much is that she really doesn't have a dog in the fight. She's like truly a person who's working there trying to do her best and trying to like keep her head down while shots are being fired from both sides. And she explains both sides really fairly. And I just think that she keeps such a steady middle ground while telling you what happened. I mean, she's like truly just reporting the facts. There's no bias. And it's really a testimony to her and to her fairness that she was able to write a book like this, having been in the fray but not taking sides. It's an impressive book, and it's really a credit to her as well. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.